I was 62 years old the day my son married a woman who could look at me like I was an old chair left on the curb. I had chosen a deep teal dress that made my skin look like polished mahogany, slipped on the round earrings I'd bought in New Orleans decades before, and pinned back the gray at my temples with a comb my mother once wore to church. It was a Saturday of blameless sunlight. The hall smelled of gardenias and icing sugar, and when I walked in 5 minutes early, because I have never kept anyone waiting, music was already threading through the air. Like a bright ribbon, I told myself to breathe, to be gracious, to be the shade tree a family could stand under. I have raised one son and buried one marriage. The first was a labor of love, the second a lesson. I learned to keep my money in my name, to keep my apartment deed in a folder that never left my fireproof box, and to keep my heart open but not naive. I thought those lessons would carry me through anything, but I did not know that a person can be humiliated in the middle of a ballroom with a piece of cake on her plate and a smile on her face. Marcus spotted me from across the room, my boy, tall, handsome, nerves tucked into his jaw, and lifted his hand in that quick, bashful wave he'd had since kindergarten. His bride, Vanessa, was at his side, sequins like a field of stars across her dress. I am not made of stone, I will tell you the truth. Vanessa was radiant. She had cheekbones that could cut fabric and a voice like a bell. When she first came into our lives, she brought kindness with her, or perhaps I only mistook a polished charm for it. I had tried to keep my door open, but some people are not guests, they are storms. There were 130 guests, I know because the caterer told me, whispering it like a secret when I asked her how many slices of the chocolate cake to expect. I balanced my plate and napkin, found my table, and let my purse rest on the chair. Two of Vanessa's aunts were arguing about whether the DJ's playlist was too modern. An old friend of mine from the hospital, 40 years in oncology, and yes, I can lift a man twice my size out of a chair without breaking a sweat, was telling me about her granddaughter. The band moved from Motown to Sinatra and back again. The speeches were not yet done. And then Vanessa turned toward me and the whole room turned with her. Hannah, she said into the microphone, smile wide enough to show every white thing she owned. So glad you made it. Was it the way she said my name, Hannah, but with a little hook at the end that suggested the word wasn't finished, that it had to climb over something sticky before it could reach her lips? She walked to my table, gathering an entourage in her wake, bridesmaids, her mother, a cousin with an iPhone already recording. Marcus hung back, this I remember as pain, not detail, his eyes flicking between me and his wife, as if he were a student who had suddenly realized the test on his desk was in a language he didn't speak. We have a surprise, Vanessa announced. The mic squealing, a very special moment for family. I am a woman who has seen death. I am a woman who has held a hand as the last breath left a body, and I have whispered to that hand, you were loved, you were loved. I am not afraid of many things, but as Vanessa stood in front of me, all jasmine and gloss, I felt a small animal of fear sit up in my chest. She didn't ask, she demanded. The keys, Hannah, she said, voice bright enough to bounce. You promised to give Marcus the keys to your apartment today, in front of everyone. So there's no confusion, isn't that right? I did not stand. I did not gather myself like a queen rising from a throne. I sat because my knees had started to knock like old pipes, and because I am a nurse and I know you do not stand when you're faint. You sit and let the world stop spinning. I put my fork down so carefully I might have been setting a fragile bone. No, I said. I promised nothing of the sort. The room made a sound like a tide changing. Someone actually gasped. People really do that? And the cousin holding the iPhone zoomed in. Vanessa tilted her head as if she were listening for something else I might say. The way you listen for a train. We discussed it, she said. You said Marcus would benefit from having a place in the city while we searched for a house, I said. I answered, calm as I could make it, that if you needed to stay for a week after the honeymoon, I would make up the guest room. Her mother, Yolanda, stepped forward, perfume rolling off her like a fog. Our children shouldn't have to struggle, she said, voice syruped with righteousness. You're in the apartment alone. It's time. I have learned that time is not a wall calendar. Time is a vine that grows around your ankles while you are busy praising other people's roses. But I also know a deed is a deed. The apartment is mine, I said quietly, bought by me. Paid for by me. I will not be giving anyone the keys. Vanessa's smile did not falter. But something cold came behind her eyes like a storm coming. Over a ridge, in front of 130 guests, she said. And her voice was no longer a bell, it was a blade. You're going to embarrass us. After all we've done for you, all they had done for me, it was such an odd sentence. I nearly laughed. I looked at my son, Marcus, I said. He came forward then, finally. Shoulders tight. Mom, he said, not into the microphone, just to me, raw and small. Could we just talk about it later? Vanessa seized his arm and lifted it like a pageant host introducing a contestant. Marcus is starting a business. We need capital. Instead of a wedding gift, all we asked was for you to contribute the apartment for the business. She faced the crowd again, building her case. Family supports family, family protects family. Yolanda added, like a chorus, I have already given my gift, I said, rising. The animal in my chest had grown teeth. It is a check. It will clear. It is not my home. You are selfish, Vanessa said, and now she did not smile, old and selfish. There are words that arrive like poison and some that arrive like sparks. The word old has never hurt me before. It is an honor to be old. It is a crown. But self-ashamed at a woman who has saved for decades on a nurse's salary, who has packed lunches and run to buses and ironed shirts and mended knees and kept quiet when others shouted that word struck bone. Keys, Vanessa said, and reached for my purse. I pulled it back. And then it happened in the ugly, ordinary way violence always does, unthinking, quick. A movement before anyone chose it. Vanessa's hand flew, sharp and flat, and met my cheek. The sound was a whip crack. My earring swung and hit my neck. The room did not breathe. I remember astonishing details: how a child stirred a soda with a straw until the ice rang. How the bandleader's mouth fell open, showing the small dark cave where a tooth had once been. I did not cry. The sting burned, the humiliation burned hotter. I looked at my son, and the expression on his face was something I cannot unsee, not horror, not rage, calculation. He was measuring the room, the cameras, his bride. He was adding up and choosing a column. I left, not dramatically. I lifted my purse and set my plate aside and walked to the double doors, my back straight. My cheek hot, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingers. The garden outside was blinding with afternoon. The sky was a blue so bold it made me furious. You can measure a life by how you react when no one is clapping. I stood on the steps and, because I am my mother's daughter, counted to 10. Then I took my phone from my purse, scrolled to a number I had not used in more than a year, and dialed. He answered on the second ring. Hannah. Judge Whitaker, I said. The name tasted like brass in my mouth. I need a favor, Hannah. He repeated, and there was a heaviness there, as if he were lifting something he had promised to put down. Are you all right? At my son's wedding, I said. There's been a misunderstanding about property. I need you to bring the folder. I was steady. I was ice. Bring the folder and bring yourself. Silence hummed. The judge and I go back a long ways, to a time when I did not know how quickly people could turn their kindness into leverage. He had told me once, after my divorce, after the settlement that left me with less than my labor deserved, that documentation is a woman's best friend. He helped me set up the trust. He helped me move the apartment into it. He had a copy of the deed, the trust, the letters, the accounts. He had his own reasons for being helpful. I am not naive about men who call after midnight. But he had never asked for payment I did not want to give. I'll be there in 30, he said. Make it 25, I said, and ended the call. I touched the heat blooming on my cheek and forced myself to breathe through my nose. I sat on the stone banister with the grace I teach to my patients: sit down, chin up, spine long, and watched the catering boys scuttle in and out, carrying champagne flutes that sparkled like easy promises. I imagined what the room looked like now that I was gone, the phone cameras put away, the whispers beginning their tiny fires. Vanessa reapplying her lip gloss in a mirror and telling herself a story in which she was right. I imagined Marcus doing what men do when the ground under them shakes, pretending it is a dance. A sparrow landed on the edge of a planter near me and tilted its head, like it was trying to understand why a woman dressed for celebration had the eyes of a soldier. The band began to play again, something up-tempo, defying ruin. A little girl in white sandals ran past me, chasing a bubble that had decided to be more beautiful than most things. Get to be, I felt the old and steady river of myself settle back into its banks. I did not plan revenge. That is another kind of prison. I planned protection. I planned clarity. I planned to put in front of 130 people the paperwork that said what was mine, and that my son was welcome to my love but not to my home. If they all cried, well, tears washed some things clean. When I heard the tires on gravel, I knew without looking it would be him. There is a sound to inevitability. The car door shut with a dignified thud, and a man in a dark suit stepped into the sunlight, carrying a worn leather briefcase under his arm. Judge Theodore Whitaker. Tall, tired, gray at the temples now. A kindness in his face that only showed when he thought no one was looking. He took one long look at my cheek and his jaw tightened. Hannah, he said again. This time like a promise. Let's go inside, I told him and stood. And together we walked back through the double doors into the air-conditioned hush before the noise. The first person to see us was Yolanda. Her eyes dropped to the briefcase like it was a weapon. In a way, it was. The band faltered. The conversation stuttered. We crossed the floor like people walking down a church aisle, everyone turning their heads as if they had been choreographed to do it. Vanessa's smile returned. But now it had the wobble a plate has when you put it on a table with one short leg. And you are someone who knows the difference between a gift and a theft. The judge said mildly. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. May I have the microphone? Vanessa clutched it. This is a private event. Nothing is private when you bring a camera to it, he replied, glancing at the cousin whose red light blinked like a conscience. Hannah, I nodded. My voice could have failed me then, but it didn't. It stepped forward like an old friend. Marcus, I said, and my son turned to me, the calculation stripped away now, replaced with something raw. I am going to say this once. The apartment is in a trust. The trustee is me. The beneficiary is me. It cannot be transferred without my consent. The papers are here, Judge. He snapped open the briefcase and drew out a folder, thick and reassuring as winter wool. He placed it on the sweetheart table, slid out the deed, the trust documents, the notarized letters. He lifted his eyes to the room. Some of you may think this is an ugly thing for a mother to do to a son, he said. And I agree, it is. Ugly to have to protect yourself from your own, but contracts exist because feelings change. This woman has secured her home by lawful means. Any harassment to force her to relinquish it is a crime. When he said the word crime, something in the air changed. You do not mess with the law on an afternoon when you are wearing rented tuxedos. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed. Yolanda muttered something about respect. Marcus took one step toward me, then another, then stopped like he had reached a cliff he didn't know how to climb. The judge spread the documents so anyone who wanted could read the words. He lifted his head, saw my cheek again, and his voice went quiet. And if anyone lays a hand on her again, he added, you will answer to me first and then to the police. No one spoke. The room breathed. I watched the arc of it. Outrage, defensiveness, dawning understanding, shame. People who had been ready to see an old woman dragged into a new obligation were now confronted with paper and consequence. Someone sniffed. Someone else said, Lord, have mercy. I do not know who cried first. Perhaps Vanessa, though she would tell the story differently later. Perhaps Marcus, when he understood that a boundary is not a betrayal. Perhaps me, though if I wept it was a small, private thing I offered to the inside of my throat, not a spectacle. But I will tell you what I remember most clearly, the sound of 130 people realizing, almost in the same second, that love without respect is just appetite dressed in white. Congratulations, the judge said to the newlyweds, his tone as courteous as if we were discussing the menu. May your marriage be built on truth. He handed me the folder. I put it in my purse, which suddenly felt light. The band, uncertain but obedient, found a softer song. The bubble the little girl had been chasing had burst long ago. She now sat on the floor, tugging off one sandal like the world had shrunk to what her fingers could manage. I breathed in the scent of gardenias and icing sugar and knew that the day had not been ruined. It had been revealed. "Mom," Marcus said finally, eyes glassy, "can we talk alone?" I looked at Vanessa, then at him. I thought of the nights I had worked doubles so he could have braces. The mornings I had risen before dawn to pack his lunch and iron his shirt. The afternoons I had walked into courtrooms alone to defend my worth. The evenings I had sat with dying men so they would not be alone. I thought of the promise I had made myself when I was 43 and my husband left. "I will never again confuse love with surrender. We can talk," I said. "But not if the first sentence is about my keys." He nodded, his shoulders folded, then squared. Vanessa stared at the floor as if it had betrayed her by staying where it was. Yolanda dabbed her eyes with a napkin, tears leaving clean roads through her makeup. I turned to the judge. "Thank you," I said, meaning the folder and the presents and the memory of the midnight calls we would not make. "Again, you don't owe me anything," he said, "except this. Take care of yourself." "I do," I told him. "I will." The room exhaled. Someone clapped, just once, then stopped, embarrassed. The cake waited in its sugary silence. The flowers, dumb and beautiful, continued to be what they were. I picked up my purse, long and slim as a secret, and took the chair at my table again. The seat was still warm. I took a bite of cake. It was too sweet, but it was mine. Outside, the afternoon kept being afternoon inside. The song changed, and when I looked at my son, I saw a boy standing on a threshold, blinking in a new light, trying to decide which door to walk through next. Marcus and I found a corner that still remembered how to be quiet. A palm and a brass pot drew a green veil between us and the rest of the wedding. The band was testing out a ballad. The room was pretending to heal. I held the clutch with the folder inside against my ribs like a book I didn't want to lend. "Mom," he said, voice low, words as careful as a man stepping stones over a creek. "I didn't know she would do that." "Not like that. Knowing isn't the only measure," I said. "Stopping is another." He flinched. I could have softened it, but I was 62 and done editing truths until they were palatable. He put both hands in his pockets and stared at the floorboards. "We're in deep," he murmured. "That business, there's debt. I thought if we had a place in the city so you would not have to pay rent while you gambled." My voice stayed level. "Is that the kind of deep you mean?" He looked up, and for a heartbeat I saw him at 10 again, wet hair slicked back after a bath. Solemn because he had dropped the glass rabbit I kept on the windowsill and shattered it. He had cried then, not because he was afraid of punishment, but because he hated disappointing me. "It's not gambling," he said, a little too fast. "It's a startup. Everything that asks for your house in exchange for hope is a gamble," I said. A bridesmaid stumbled past us, laughing, the hem of her dress catching on a chair. We watched her unhook it, the small tug, the small triumph. "I love you," Marcus said. And the words fell between us like something heavy and sharp. "I do. Then love me with respect." I answered. He nodded, swallowed. "I will talk to Vanessa," he said. "I will make her apologize." "Apologies are a corridor," I said. "You still have to walk through to where the truth is." He had always been a quick study. He took that in without arguing. "I'll make it right," he said, though the tone told me he didn't know yet what right looked like. He leaned in as if to kiss my cheek, then stopped when he saw my skin redden there. And the hesitation was a more eloquent sorrow than any embrace could have been. "Are you going to stay for the cake?" I said, "and the first dance?" "I won't have the story be that I walked out of my son's wedding." He smiled, briefly, crookedly, the way a door smiles when it's been open 100 times, and still surprises you by how easily it swings. "Thank you. Dance with your wife," I said. "Start with joy, find the rest tomorrow." He left, and I stood a moment longer with the palm shadow on my shoes. When I returned to the table, the conversations around me had already braided themselves into fresh shapes, as if drama were only another ribbon to tuck into hair. The judge had gone, leaving behind a business card on my bread plate, a small rectangle of reassurance, his neat handwriting across the back, "Call if they try anything." The DJ announced the first dance. Vanessa and Marcus moved toward the center. of the room under a spill of light. Vanessa's face had been repaired by powder and a professional smile. Marcus looked tight, sincere, as if he were dancing on a plank stretched over a drop. When the singer crooned the first line, I felt 100 eyes swing toward me, greedy for reaction. I had nothing to give them but the rhythm. I tapped my finger on my knee and let the moment belong to the two people it was supposed to belong to after the dance. After a round of applause that sounded like people clapping for the idea of love, more than for the actual humans attempting it, a few guests came to me in ones and twos to murmur their sympathies or their surprise. The cousin with the phone avoided me. Yolanda hovered like a judgment that had lost its nerve. A little boy wandered over to ask whether earrings hurt. Only if people forget they are attached to ears, I told him, and he went away satisfied. I ate 2 more bites of cake and decided it was not as sweet as I thought. Vanessa approached last. She came alone. The crowd pretended not to watch up close. The glitter on her dress had rubbed against her arms, leaving faint red scratches. Her perfume drifted ahead of her and announced that she was composed. Hannah, she said. And the hook on my name was gone. Vanessa, her eyes flicked to my cheek. She stopped. She looked over her shoulder as if considering whether this conversation would be better as a performance, then seemed to change her mind. She moved a half step closer, dropping her voice. I was out of line, she said. I am sorry. She swallowed. My mother, she said we had to show strength. She said if we didn't secure the apartment today, we'd never get it. She was in my ear all morning. A woman can choose which voice she lets into her ears, I said. And which one she lets travel down her arm. I know. She gathered her bouquet tighter, stems pressing into her palm. I didn't grow up without stability. When I see a door, I try to bolt it behind me. A breath, almost a laugh without the courage to be one. I turned your home into a bolt. I considered her this brittle, beautiful creature whose survival had taught her lessons that were now injuring other people. Fear is not a plan, I said. It is a temperature. It tells you something about the weather inside you. That is all. Her mouth trembled. She steadied it. I am not asking for the keys, she said. I am asking for a chance with you. I let the please stand in the air for a moment, like a note testing whether the room would echo. Your chance starts with boundaries, I said. You will not speak about my property again if you and Marcus need help. You will ask without strategy and accept the answer without theatrics. You will not raise your hand to me or to anyone else. If you fail at any of that, you and I will have business. And you will not enjoy doing business with me. Understood, she whispered. There was a sharp little dignity in her assent, as if she had just learned a new step and was proud of getting it right. Now go dance, I told her, and learn to be married to my son, not to your mother's fear. She blinked at that hard, like someone trying not to cry on a day they spent hours perfecting their face. Then she nodded, turned and walked away, her train catching on the same chair the bridesmaid had snagged earlier, and she unhooked it with a practiced hand. The rest of the evening behaved as a wedding should. Toasts, some clever, some long. A bouquet toss that ended with a girl of 8 catching the flowers, because hers were the most honest hands. A moment where the power flickered and the room cheered when the lights returned. As if electricity had chosen them by name, I danced once with an old friend, our hips remembering the map to songs we used to move to when we were 20, and believed the night was permanent. I left before midnight, because nothing good happens for me after midnight but sleep. Outside, the air had folded itself into a cooler version of afternoon. I drove home with the windows cracked, the smell of jasmine following me like a small, white ghost. In the mirror, my cheek had settled into a sunset stain. I touched it only once at a red light, then let my hands lie quiet in my lap. My apartment greeted me the way good rooms do, with integrity. The lock turned like a throat clearing. The hallway sighed. The living room offered the blue sofa and the book with its spine asleep on the coffee table. I set my purse down, slid the folder into the fireproof box, and wrapped a scarf from my mother around the metal as if paper could be comforted by fabric. I brewed chamomile tea and did not drink it. I stood at the window and watched the city move through its own thoughts. Somewhere a siren, somewhere a laugh. The building across from me had a light on in the third-floor kitchen. where a woman with short hair danced while she loaded her dishwasher, her hips swinging to a private song. I envied her simplicity and then forgave myself for the envy. The phone rang just before 1. My hand was already halfway to it. Old instincts. Old nights of waiting up for a boy who missed his curfew. Yes? I said, and my voice sounded like an instrument stored in a good case for many years and still tuned. It's me, Marcus said. We're at the hotel. She's asleep. A pause. I can't sleep. What is inside your head? I asked. Math. He said, numbers I didn't want to look at. I opened the spreadsheet and it looked back at me and laughed. Numbers do not laugh, I said. Then it was me laughing at me. He exhaled. I could hear a mini fridge hum, a hallway door. Click, the soft loneliness of carpet. Am I a bad son? No, I said. You are a grown man learning not to be a boy. He was silent for a moment. I used to think being a good son meant saying yes to the loudest person in the room. He said, you aren't loud. She is. I thought volume was vision. You know better now, I said. I want to fix it, he whispered. Begin with truth, I said. Then take one step that costs you something and gives someone else relief. The next morning, Sunday, was bright and unrepentant. I woke before my alarm, as I always do, and walked 2 miles along the river where the geese keep their own arguments. In my building's lobby, the doorman lifted an eyebrow at my cheek but did not comment. He slid a newspaper across the desk. With a magician's discretion, as if news required velvet gloves, back upstairs, I fried an egg, ate it over toast, and set my phone face down on the table while I gave myself the gift of reading 3 pages of a novel without interruption. At 9, Marcus called again. I've drafted an email to our investors, he said, voice steadier. As if he had found his own bones and decided to inhabit them. We're pausing operations, returning what we can. I'm taking a job full-time, benefits will live within that, and I've asked Vanessa to see a counselor with me. That is a good step, I said. It costs me pride, he said, and gives you relief. So? It fits the rule. It does, I said. I let the quiet after that sentence be approval, not absence. Do you want me to look at the email? No, he said, and I heard the first clean chord of adulthood in that refusal. I wrote it in my own voice. Then send it, I said. He did not ask to borrow money. He did not hint or hedge. He began to tell me about the job marketing for a hospital system. Ironic and useful, and we talked like two people who had dropped a burden between them and were considering what else they could carry now that their hands were free. Vanessa called later. The apology she offered had more structure, less fear. I booked the counselor. She said, Tuesday at 4. I told Marcus I want to be the kind of wife who returns what isn't hers. That will make you a good many other things, too, I said. We did not become tender that day. We became possible. That is enough for a Sunday. In the weeks that followed, the story slid through the community like a rumor that had acquired paperwork. Some people avoided my eyes in the grocery store, worried I would recruit them for a crusade. Others touched my forearm in the cereal aisle and whispered, good for you, as if boundaries were a secret society. The nurses on my floor, a sturdy choir of women who know the smell of truth, brought me a pie and left it in the break room with a note that said, in case you need more sweet than the world is offering. I did not share every detail with them, but one afternoon when the ward was quiet and the monitors sang their little background songs, and a rainstorm turned the city into an old photograph, I told a young nurse named Priya what my mother had told me after my father left. Do not let anyone audit your heart if you have not hired them to do your books. How do you hire them? Priya asked, eyes huge above her mask. You watch, I said. You give them a small responsibility and see if they return it intact. You note whether they speak an I more than we. You note whether they ever say please and mean it. The rain let up. The sky shook itself out like a towel. On a Wednesday, the judge called. Just checking, he said. Any more storms? Only summer ones, I said. They pass, and the city smells new. Good, he said. Then, after a moment, Hannah, I'm not calling for this, but I'll say it anyway. I've taken myself off the midnight list. I know, I said gently. Thank you for not making me pretend to be surprised. We talked about his grandchildren. We did not talk about loneliness. Some friendships are steeples you can see from a distance, not houses you sleep in. One evening, a week before their second counseling session, Marcus and Vanessa came over. I set the table with the good plates and the cheap forks and cooked a stew that had more patience than brilliance. Vanessa brought a bottle of wine as if it were a passport. We ate. We did not speak of trusts or deeds. We spoke of shows we pretended not to watch and a neighbor's ridiculous planter full of fox lemons. After we'd cleared the dishes, Vanessa asked if she could see the balcony. We stood there in the bruised gold of late day, the city rustling its feathers. She put both hands flat on the railing as if accepting a charge from the metal. I have never lived anywhere alone, she said, eyes on the skyline. Not me, not really alone. I went from my mother to roommates to Marcus. When I look at your apartment, it looks like a woman's name written in her own handwriting. I wanted to copy it. I wanted to write over it. You can write your own, I said. How? She asked. Small and honest. Start with a room, I said. Even a corner. Put one chair there that does not ask anyone's permission to be. Sit in it while you pay a bill with money you earned. Water a plant. Throw away a thing you kept because someone told you it meant love. Keep a thing because it makes you breathe easier when you walk past it. That is how you begin. She nodded. The light found the tiny scratches on her arms again and turned them into harmless glitter. In the street below, a bus sighed and knelt for a woman with a cane. The woman stepped on without apology. The doors folded, the machine lifted, the night came a little closer. They left by 9 when I closed the door behind them. I did not lock it right away. I stood in the portrait of my own space and felt the air tug at me like a loose thread. I threaded it back. I locked up on my fridge. There is a list I wrote once when I was 43 and raw, 10 ways to be the person who owns this life. I had checked each item in pencil over the years, then erased the check and written it again whenever the lesson asked to be learned a second or third time. That night I added a line at the bottom and wrote, in careful letters, 11. Do not let anyone draft you into drama you did not audition for. I slept. I dreamed of water that lifted but did not drown. In the morning, I made tea I did drink. And when I walked along the river, the geese had paused their argument to watch a turtle climb a worn slope. The turtle took its time. It was still a turtle when it reached the top. That, I decided, was the point. Life did not become perfect. It became mine again. And when, months later, a crisis came from a direction I had not rehearsed for, I met it with the steadiness that comes from knowing where your keys are and what door they fit. The weeks that followed taught me how silence can either heal or rot, depending on how you choose to hold it. For Marcus and Vanessa, silence turned into labor, slow, difficult, sometimes thankless. I could see it in the small ways. Marcus started calling every Sunday without fail, not to ask for anything, but simply to ask. Asterisk, how was your week, Mom? Asterisk, Vanessa began to send little text pictures of meals she cooked, snapshots of flowers she bought, sometimes a single line. Asterisk, trying again today. Asterisk, I did not rush to trust it. At 62, you learn patience isn't just waiting, it's watching without declaring the ending too soon. One afternoon, as autumn stretched its copper arms over the city, 3 of my oldest friends came over. We'd known each other since nursing school. Ellen with her quick wit, Marjorie with her fierce prayers, and Naomi, who never married but had more children, calling her auntie than any of us combined. They came bearing casserole and wine, as if the ancient recipe for comforting a woman hadn't changed since the first kitchen. We sat in my living room, the balcony door cracked open to let in the scent of rain on concrete. They wanted the whole story when I told them. Ellen smacked the arm of her chair so hard her bracelet jingled. She slapped you at a wedding? In front of God and 130 witnesses? Yes, and you didn't slap her back. No, she whistled low. Better woman than me. Marjorie leaned forward, her eyes kindling. That girl is wounded. Mark my words, Hannah. People don't lash out like that unless something inside is bleeding. Bleeding is no excuse for stealing, Naomi said, sharp as a needle. She reached for her glass. You did right, Hannah. You protected yourself. That's what's important. Their voices wrapped around me, a chorus of outrage, compassion, and warning. I felt the weight of their friendship like a quilt patched, sturdy, covering me against the cold. By winter, Marcus had settled into his new job. He sounded lighter on the phone, as if the steady paycheck had lifted a weight he hadn't realized he carried. Vanessa was still learning to share her space with honesty, but she was trying. Once, she even asked me if I'd teach her how to make my gumbo. So I did, one Saturday. She came over with a notebook, determined to write every step down. I had to laugh. Recipes, like life, don't live on paper, they live in hands. I made her stir the roux until her arm ached, made her taste and adjust until the flavor sang. When she sat back, sweating and laughing, I thought, maybe there's hope yet. Hope, however, doesn't mean smooth sailing. Around Christmas, Yolanda tried again. She called me. Imagine that. Bold as brass, and said, it's not too late to do the right thing. You know the apartment would give them stability. I listened. I let her speak every word, every insinuation that I was old and selfish, until she ran out of steam. Then I said, very calmly, Yolanda, this will be the last conversation we ever have. My son is welcome in my life. My daughter-in-law is welcome. You are not. And I hung up. When I told Marcus later, he whispered, thank you. That was the first time I realized he was not just learning how to be a husband. He was learning how to stand between two women without being crushed. By spring, life had taken on a rhythm again, the kind that lets you forget the noise of storms once they've passed. My cheek no longer carried the faint mark of Vanessa's hand, but the memory lived in me the way an old scar does, not painful, just a reminder of what I'd survived. The apartment became more than four walls. It became my sanctuary. I bought myself a new armchair, deep green velvet, and put it right by the window. Every evening, I sat there with a book or simply the city lights, reminding myself that I owned this peace, that I had earned it. Sometimes Marcus and Vanessa came over. Sometimes they didn't. I didn't measure love by the frequency of visits anymore, but by the sincerity of the moments we shared. When Marcus laughed from his belly again, I counted that as progress. When Vanessa came without her mother's shadow trailing her, I counted that as a small victory. But life is never content to let you rest too long. In June, my health gave me a scare. A dizzy spell at the hospital turned into a short stay under observation. Lying in the bed I'd spent decades standing beside for others, I realized how strange it feels to be the patient. Marcus came every day after work. Vanessa brought flowers that didn't smell too strong. She'd remembered my headaches. They sat with me, asked if I needed water, held my hand when the doctor explained it was nothing serious, just a reminder to slow down. For the first time, I saw them as a team, not a battlefield. When I was discharged, Marcus insisted on driving me home. Vanessa stocked my fridge with groceries. I let them. Because strength is not only in saying no, it's also in knowing when to say yes. That summer, we three had dinner on my balcony. Cicadas buzzed like they were singing back up to our conversation. Vanessa turned to me, eyes softer than I had ever seen them, and said, I never had a mother teach me how to stand firm without shouting. You've been doing that, even when I hated you for it. I looked at her, really looked tanned for once, didn't see an enemy or a threat. I saw a young woman still learning to write her life in her own handwriting, still smudging the ink. You'll get there, I told her. But only if you keep practicing. She nodded, a tear sliding quick down her cheek. And Marcus, my boy who once calculated rooms like they were chessboards, reached for her hand instead of mine. That was right. That was what husbands are supposed to do. At 63, 64, 65, I cannot stop the years from climbing, but I can choose how to walk with them. My story will not end with keys or slaps or wedding day humiliation. It will end with the steady knowledge that I protected what was mine, taught my son a truth he needed to learn, and maybe, just maybe, gave my daughter-in-law a chance to grow into a better woman. I do not ask for perfection anymore. I ask for peace, and most nights, sitting in my green chair with the city outside my window, peace is exactly what I have. When I turned 66, I hosted a small birthday dinner in my apartment. Nothing grand, just Marcus, Vanessa, and a few close friends who still remembered me as the young nurse with a sharp tongue and quick hands. The table was crowded. with food, gumbo, cornbread, roasted chicken, and Naomi's famous peach cobbler dot as we ate. Laughter filled the room. For the first time in years, I felt that my home was not just a fortress but a hearth. Vanessa leaned over during dessert, placed a small box in front of me, and said, "Happy birthday." Hannah, inside, was a delicate silver keychain engraved with the words asterisk your home, your story asterisk. She didn't say more, but her eyes told me everything. It wasn't an attempt to erase the past, it was an acknowledgement, a kind of quiet surrender. I closed the box and whispered, "Thank you." That night, I slept with the keychain on my nightstand, feeling like a wound had stitched itself closed. Not all news was sweet. The following winter, my oldest friend Marjorie fell ill, a heart attack. Sudden and cruel. I spent long nights in the hospital where I had once worked, sitting by her bed as monitors beeped and nurses hurried past. She recovered slowly, but she was never the same. Marjorie, who had always been the strongest voice in the room, grew quieter, more contemplative. One night, while I rubbed lotion into her hands, she said, "Hannah, we're on the last lap. Promise me we'll finish it without fear." I promised. And in that promise, I found a new kind of strength, the kind that doesn't just protect property or pride, but dignity itself. Meanwhile, Marcus thrived in his new job. The weight of debt no longer chained him, and I saw him laugh more, breathe more. Vanessa enrolled in night classes, business management. Hands sometimes called to ask me to quiz her before exams. She even began volunteering at a local shelter, cooking meals once a week. One Sunday, Marcus and Vanessa invited me to their apartment, a modest two-bedroom they rented near the park. It smelled of fresh paint and determination. They'd framed one of their wedding photos, but the one I noticed most was of the three of us, taken on my balcony. It wasn't perfect, my hair was wild, Vanessa's eyes were puffy from crying. Marcus looked caught mid-laugh, but it was real. "This is our favorite," Vanessa admitted, almost shy. And in that moment, I realized my boundaries had not just protected me, they had also given them the space to become better people. One spring morning, as I cleaned out old boxes, I found a letter my mother had written but never sent. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting steady. Hannah, do not confuse giving with erasing yourself. A woman who loses her home loses her name. I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands, and thought of the wedding day, of Vanessa's slap, of the judge's voice steadying the room. My mother's wisdom had traveled across decades to land in my lap exactly when I needed it most. I placed the letter in the fireproof box beside my deed, and the keychain, my life, my story, my legacy, kept safe not only in paper but in spirit. When I stepped into my 70s, the city no longer felt like a battlefield, it felt like an old companion. My days grew slower, my mornings filled with river walks, tea, and the simple joy of feeding sparrows on my balcony. Marcus and Vanessa built a life steadier than I once believed possible. Their quarrels softened into compromises, their ambitions reshaped into something sustainable. At 35, Marcus became a father, the first time he placed my granddaughter in my arms. I thought, here is proof that boundaries can grow into blessings. The child's name was Grace. She had a laugh that reminded me of Marcus at 5, chasing bubbles in the yard. Vanessa sat beside me that day, tired but glowing, and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me. I want Grace to learn strength the way you taught me." Life, of course, took as much as it gave. Ellen passed suddenly, Naomi followed a year later, and Marjorie, my fierce, prayerful Marjorie, slipped away one autumn evening with her hand in mine. I buried them all, one by one, and carried their voices in my heart. Grief made me smaller, but Grace made me larger again. I told her stories, taught her how to stir gumbo, and showed her the balcony where her parents once fought and forgave. She called it Grandma's Castle in the Sky. At 78, I knew my years ahead were fewer than those behind. One evening, I gathered Marcus, Vanessa, and Grace at my table. The same table that had held arguments, reconciliations, and countless meals. I placed the fireproof box before them, inside, the deed, the letter from my mother, the keychain Vanessa once gave me. "This," I said, "is not just paper. It is proof that a woman's name must remain her own. I give you not the apartment, but the story of it. Let it remind you, love without respect is hunger, and respect without love is stone. Build your lives with both. They nodded, tears in their eyes. Grace held my hand and whispered, Grandma, I'll remember. Years later, when I could no longer walk the river path, I still sat in my green chair by the window, watching the city lights pulse like a living heart. The apartment, my sanctuary, never betrayed me. And when I finally closed my eyes for the last time, I did so knowing this truth. I had not surrendered my name, my home, or my dignity. Instead, I had given my family something stronger than Kizan. Inheritance of strength, boundary, and love. That is my story. That is my legacy.